Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we're watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on Season 2, Episode 14, entitled Whispers. This episode aired February 6th, 1994. Before we dig into this one, is there anything you'd like to correct from the previous podcast?
No, it was perfect.
Can you remind me what the episode was about?
It's the one where Miles and Julian are helping an alien race dispose of their viruses.
Oh, the Dilbert one.
Yes, the race with the Dilbert hair.
That was a good one. Yeah, that was perfect. You're right.
I do have a little commentary on that one, a little additional commentary. So we know Julian might be a little ethically challenged because in the episode Meloria, he did some experiments on her, which may be questionable that he should be doing that. Mm-hmm. So I have a theory. He said, if you remember when they were in the shuttle, that Miles only had an hour left unless they get him back to Deep Space Nine. We don't know how long it took them to get there. So my theory is Miles died and he actually cloned him.
Why do you think that?
Because it seems to me like the kind of thing Julian would do.
I see.
You know, Sisko would be like, Keiko's going to be really upset. I'm going to have to find a new engineer. And it's just easier.
Yeah. He already had to tell Keiko once that Miles was dead. Now I'd have to do the second time.
Yeah. Oh, we rescued him. Yeah, he died on the way back.
Well, the only thing I would correct about your correction is that you called Melora Meloria, but it was just Melora.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Meloria. That sounds like a disease you get from mosquitoes.
Oh my gosh. Very close. All right. Well, should we dive into this episode?
Absolutely.
In the cold open, we open on a runabout going into the wormhole. Miles is going to the Parada system at maximum warp. He must need a new purse. I watched this episode yesterday. Gosh. After I had, as you know, a very bad migraine in the morning, so I was worried that I wouldn't be as on top of the episode as usual. But now that I've seen this note about the purse and the Parada system, I think I was okay.
Yeah, you're on form.
Paying attention. Yeah.
That sounds like you, yes.
Anyway, Miles opens a personal log and says he's got to find a way to set the record straight about the last 52 hours. I thought 52 is kind of a weird amount, but then I remembered that the Bajoran day is 26 hours, so it makes sense. So It's been 2 days. His log sounds ominous. He's saying he doesn't know if he'll still be alive when the log is recovered. He's sure they'll be coming after him. He says if he's right, they won't want him warning the Paradans.
Oh, immediately we start off with there's some kind of mystery going on.
Right. Then he orders a Jamaican blend coffee, double strong, double sweet, from the replicator.
That's disgusting.
Ugh, stop with the double sweet coffees on this show. It's so gross. He says he doesn't know who they are yet, and that's part of a puzzle that doesn't make any sense. The first time he noticed something was wrong was the first morning he got back to the station. Then it switches to Miles in bed, as we obviously are flashing back. He wakes up noticing that Keiko isn't in bed. He finds that Keiko and Molly are already having breakfast, and it's only 5:30 in the morning. He orders his same coffee again from the replicator. He asks Molly if she had sweet dreams, and she says, "Go away," and turns and runs off.
She says, "I hate you."
Yeah, it was terrible. Keiko is also acting very snippy, and she asks what he was doing on his trip. Miles said the Paradas put him through basic training of all the security measures they want in place for the peace talks. Keiko then says she's taking Molly with her to work, which Miles finds a little strange. Molly continues to make a very unhappy face in Miles' direction the whole time. It was so funny.
Yes, it is. Something is definitely up. This is not the happy family we've seen before.
Right. Now we meet a Starfleet engineer named De Curtis, who is doing something in Odo's office with a little tool and a wall panel. Miles is irked that he started without him, saying he was waiting for Odo to return from Bajor because they have to realign the entire security net for the peace talks. De Curtis says Sisko didn't think they should wait for Odo, which annoys Miles, and he heads out to talk to Sisko.
So we're seeing the chain of command not being followed here as well. So, yeah, that's going to set Miles's emergency radar off.
So Miles stomps out onto the promenade, but he stops in his tracks when he notices Keiko talking to Sisko in the distance. He hides so that they don't notice him, but he has a very suspicious look on his face, and we cue the theme song.
And Keiko also seems a little perturbed when she's talking to Sisko.
Yeah, she seems anxious. I was excited right away by this because I love the mystery episodes where people are acting funny and one person thinks that they're the only normal one. I love those are my favorites.
Yes.
I like that. After the theme, we go back to Miles in the shuttle, and he's like 53 minutes from the Parada system now. He scans for warp signatures and finds that there's another runabout following him. He continues his personal log. He enters Ops, and in his voiceover, he says, "The way everyone was acting, they might have been trying to pull off a surprise party for me." I thought that was pretty funny. And we do learn here that Miles' birthday is in September, which I don't know why I wrote that down, but he does say that.
It's an important fact.
Yeah. Julian tells Miles that it's time for his physical and to be in his office in an hour. Miles argues and tries to avoid it, but Sisko comes out of his office and insists because the annual report to Starfleet Command is due next week, so everyone has to have their appointment with the doctor.
Pulls rank on him.
Then Miles follows Sisko into his office for a chat. Sisko immediately apologizes for assigning DeCurtis to the security work without letting Miles know, and he kind of diffuses the argument before it happens. Good leadership.
Definitely.
Sisko says he read Miles' report on the Paradas, and it sounds like they're unusually preoccupied with security. Miles says they are a little paranoid, but they've been engaged in civil war for 12 years, so it makes sense.
Now, this is something interesting here. The Parada are on the other side of the wormhole. So Starfleet is getting involved in diplomacy and politics outside the Alpha Quadrant.
Right. Well, the Bajorans are, because it's a Bajoran station.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
And I don't think they covered whether it was the Bajorans hosting it or Starfleet hosting it.
Well,
or the Federation hosting it, rather.
Odo was on Bajor.
Yeah.
So I assume it had something to do with the peace talks. Yeah, they don't really spell it out.
Yeah, but it is showing that the Federation or the Bajorans are expanding their influence and trying to help people in the Gamma Quadrant.
Yeah. Sisko asks Miles for something that's not in his report, something that might help in the talks. Miles says he did notice that the Paradas have an odor from some kind of skin excretions, and it changes with their moods. And Sisko says he'll try not to get them too upset. Then Sisko tells Miles that the engineering crew can handle the setup for the Paradan event because he has bigger problems for Miles. All 3 upper pylons are down again. That's impossible, Miles insists, because he rebuilt all those systems himself, but he says he'll get on it right away. After your physical, Sisko reminds him as Miles starts to leave. But then he stops and he asks what he was talking to Keiko about this morning. And Sisko says that Jake is having some problems with his grades. And this is the first sign, I would say, really, of something not being true, because Perfect Sweet Jake cannot possibly have any problems with his grades. This is clearly fake news.
That's funny. That's exactly what I would think you would say.
Yeah. Right. Miles says, for I think the 30th time, Keiko is very fond of the boy, and he was sure that she'd help him out. Then we go to medical, and Julian is scanning Miles with 2 tools, like, pointed at his head. Miles is very annoyed, and he's sick of the poking, prodding, and the questions.
He is very irritated by having to take a physical. It follows what we've established with this character is he has no time for nonsense. And I think he would see having to have a physical as, I feel fine. Why am I having to put up with this nonsense?
Right. Julian takes note of his short temper, then says it's perfectly normal behavior, which was funny.
Well, for Miles it is.
Julian says he knows how Miles feels about doctors, but Miles says, it's not doctors I have a problem with, it's you, Julian. And Julian pipes in the it's you, Julian part at the same time as Miles. Suddenly, Miles kind of panics, and he thinks maybe he's dying, and that's why everyone is acting so strangely. But Julian says, relax, I'm giving you a clean bill of health. But when Miles leaves the room, Julian looks at his data pad, a bit confused or concerned, not sure which at this point.
Yeah, I think adding to Miles's overall sense of suspicion was the fact that Julian had forgotten basic details about Miles, like that his mother died and his father had remarried.
Yeah.
I have the feeling that might just be Julian being in his own world.
That's possible, or Julian could have been doing a test.
Oh, could have been.
Miles is walking through the promenade again, and Jake runs up to him saying, I need your help on a science project. Jake is now taller than Miles, and he's wearing a new outfit.
Yes, he is.
They must have to keep getting him new clothes because he keeps growing so much. This outfit is maroon with some green on the top. The colors are good. I liked it. Anyway, Miles says he'll be happy to help Jake get his grades up, but Jake says his grades are great, and he wants to keep it that way. Then he runs off, leaving Miles confused. I mean, when you're going to tell lies, you have to be more careful than that. You can't involve other people in your lies without covering your tracks.
I was surprised that Sisko didn't think up something better.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I was just asking how Jake was doing with his grades.
Yeah.
If Nog was interfering with Jake's work, how things were going. It wasn't any big deal.
Yeah.
But Miles does have that very perturbed look.
He's very suspicious now as we go into the ad break. Now Miles is working on the upper pylons. He says Sisko was telling the truth that they had failed again. He couldn't help but notice that this problem was going to keep him occupied while someone else was working on the security detail for the peace talks.
Oh.
He heads off to check in with De Curtis, who says everything is on track in securing the Paradin's quarters. Miles asks him to open the door so he can look for himself, but this new guy says only Major Kira has the access codes to override the security seal. So Miles calls Kira, asking for the access codes to the Parada's quarters, but before she can answer, Sisko interrupts saying, "Chief, what are you doing down there?" Miles says he spent the last week going over the arrangement for the Paradas, so he wants to be involved. But Sisko is like, "Fix the pylons, that's your priority." And now he's very suspicious.
Was very suspicious.
Yes. And he heads off, but he lurks around a corner and he sees De Curtis open the door that he said was sealed, feeding his paranoia.
Oh, he's figuring out they're deliberately trying to keep him out of the loop.
Yes.
And the way that Sisko responded immediately, it's like, oh, are you listening in on all of Miles's communications?
Well, he called Kira. I assume she was in ops, and he was probably just standing right there.
Oh, that's true. Unless he had his office door shut.
Yes.
I think he's secretly listening to everything Miles does.
Miles bumps into Jake on the promenade again, and Jake has some old part that he shows Miles, which makes Miles all nostalgic. He tells him to come by after dinner and he'll help him with his science project. Miles then asks Jake if anything unusual happened while he was away last week, but before he can answer, Kira calls Jake from behind, saying his father's looking for him, so Jake takes off. Kira then asks Miles if everything is under control, and he says it is. And then when she turns and leaves, his face shifts into an annoyed look.
Miles is just the master of the suspicious look face. I mean, he has this sort of grumpy expression, and
Yes.
most of this episode, that is the fixed expression on his face.
That is true.
And something that I thought was funny in this scene when Jake is sitting next to a guy on the promenade, and I assume he's talking to him about the little transmitter thing that he was building.
Oh, yeah.
I thought he looked just like a Vogon from The Hitchhiker's Guide.
I will have to take your word for it, because I don't know what that is. I saw that movie, but I don't remember. Was it in the movie?
Yeah, they write awful poetry, and they're sort of like bureaucrats.
Okay.
And I'm fairly sure that was one sitting next to Jake, which leads to this is yet another shared universe. So Star Trek is shared with The Hitchhiker's Guide.
Sure. Now Miles is back working on the pylons, saying that the problem was a real needle in a haystack. When he finally found it, he couldn't imagine how it had actually happened unless someone had broken it deliberately. Of course.
Well, that seems to happen all the time on the station, so why is he surprised?
It does. I don't know. He's back in his quarters now, and he tells Keiko that Jake is coming over to work on his science project, but Keiko says that Sisko just called to say Jake can't make it because he's not feeling well. And then they have a whole conversation about, how kids are. He probably ate too much on the promenade. I don't know. The whole thing is suspicious.
Yes.
And then Miles asks where Molly is, and Keiko says she's spending the night at the Fredricksons. Then Miles gets an idea, but when he wraps his arms around Keiko, she pulls away very awkwardly and does not appreciate the kiss from him. It's very uncomfortable.
Yeah, she sort of pushes him off.
Yeah.
What's happening here? This isn't the loving relationship we've seen before.
So they sit down to eat, and Miles finds that she's made some things that he likes, but she doesn't like, and that makes him even more suspicious. He pokes around suspiciously at his stew, but he doesn't eat it. And they do these real crazy close-ups on the faces and dramatic music, and
yes.
It's like they're trying to imply that she poisoned the stew.
Exactly.
And he says he doesn't have any appetite. And then in his voiceover log, he says he never found out if there was actually anything wrong with the stew, but he knew as he looked at his wife that this was not his Keiko.
Oh, yeah.
Dum, dum, dum.
So he didn't eat the stew.
No.
Is he some kind of robot, perhaps?
But he's drinking lots of coffee.
Oh, maybe it's a robot that runs on coffee. Like Bender runs on alcohol. The O'Brien robot runs on strong, sweet coffee.
Perhaps.
The end of this scene was kind of odd, though, the way they kept on doing those close-ups of the faces. It felt very soap opera-y.
Yes.
Miles holding a fork to his mouth with the suspicious look on his face.
Yes, the close-ups on the faces was very funny. Well, it's all because Keiko said she'd just eat a salad. That made him suspicious.
Ah.
Back on the shuttle, he continues his log, saying he didn't get much sleep that night. He started trying to figure out what was going on, scanning for unknown microagents and chemical agents with bioactive properties, but the computer found no issues. So he's running all these computer scans from his quarters, and I don't know, Keiko's nowhere to be found. I don't know where she went. But he orders his Jamaican coffee again, and I thought he didn't drink coffee in the evenings, because this is the middle of the night.
Oh. Yeah, we just established that in the last episode.
Yeah. Right. He asks the computer to play back all logs of the officers from while he was away. And then we have a montage of him listening to logs as time passes, and he keeps shifting around on the couch.
Yep.
And we get little snippets of audio from Dax, Sisko, Kira, and even to Curtis.
And I like how during this log playback, you have Kira getting annoyed at something the Council of Ministers was doing.
Yeah. She's annoyed at some bureaucrat. But then he gets an access denied error, and the logs after his arrival back at the station are restricted. The computer says access is restricted to level 1, which O'Brien says, I am level 1, but when he enters his code, he doesn't get access.
Now, I'd be really suspicious because they never changed the passwords.
Yeah, that does seem very suspicious. Next, he heads into Ops, dropping down into that little lower area and removing a panel from the wall. DeCurtis pokes his head over the railing, asking if he can help, but Miles says he's just making sure the pylons are working. And DeCurtis says, you're an inspiration to us all. Then in the voiceover, Miles says there were several traps set into the subroutines, no doubt to let someone know if I'd penetrated their security lockout. But he says he managed to release the protected files without any problem. And so he returns to his quarters. But he says he didn't find much in those hidden files. He did find that they were analyzing and reanalyzing what he'd put into his report about Paradan security. He also found several entries from Sisko about secured messages from the Parada system, but no indication of what those messages were about. All very suspicious.
Oh, yeah. Something is going on. I like how they're building a sense of not just Miles being paranoid, but there are all these little things that are out of the norm, which are setting him off.
Right.
So it's not one thing, it's sort of a whole collection that are coming together.
Yep.
And the way they're presenting him in this episode is quite nicely done. Because as you follow it, you're like, oh, that's kind of strange. That's odd. I would worry that wouldn't work so well if you hadn't watched, if you like, all the previous episodes. So you didn't really know how the characters were.
That's true. You just would have to take his word for it, I guess. Then Odo returns from his trip to Bajor, and Miles meets him at the airlock so that no one else can get to him first. He takes Odo to a quiet place and tells him that everyone is acting funny, except for Jake. I thought that was hilarious.
Yes.
After hearing the suspicions, Odo says he doesn't want the Paradans coming anywhere near the station until we get this cleared up. Odo says he'll investigate, and if he can confirm that something is up, they can go to the Bajoran and Starfleet authorities together. This is a great relief to Miles, who heads back to his quarters, happy to have an ally.
Don't you think Odo must be thinking, oh no, has somebody been playing with telepathic spheres again?
Yeah, that's what I thought. He's like, ugh, dramatis personae, come back.
Yeah. Did somebody find some more of these and this is like the next episode of the soap opera?
Right.
For those of you that didn't listen to that episode, I thought that was actually an alien soap opera that they were just reliving.
Yes. Miles can't quite sit still, and he starts building something in his quarters, but they don't show you what.
He has a few tricks up his sleeve.
Yes. Miles is in Quark's now, and Quark asks him if he's ready for his racquetball rematch with Bashir, but Miles is annoyed and tells him to change the subject. Quark says, tell me about the Paradas. Now Miles is really suspicious of this question, and he tells Quark he'll have to learn about the Paradas from someone else. And then Odo calls, asking Miles to come to his office.
I was surprised in that scene that Quark did not remember the rule number.
It's always good business to know about new customers before they walk in your door.
Ah.
Well, he said, it's one of the high ones. 194, I think. And that was the number, so he did remember it.
Ah.
Yeah. But that did feel a little bit suspicious.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, I think in the episode with Pell, Rules of Acquisition, my least favorite episode so far, he made a big deal about how Pell knew all the rules and all of the, what were they called, the commentary?
And the commentaries, yes.
Right. So I don't think it's completely normal for people to remember every single rule.
So she was a far better Ferengi than he was.
Well, sure. The note that I took on this scene was that it was awfully short, and it's surprising that they would put Quark through all the makeup just for a scene that short and inconsequential.
Yeah.
Because he's not in it again, I don't think.
And another thing I think that should raise your suspicions is I did not see Morn in this scene.
Oh.
I mean, he's always in the bar. Where was he?
Up to no good.
Perhaps.
In Odo's office, Odo asks Miles what he knows about the Paradan rebels, but Miles says he doesn't know much about the politics of the situation, just that they've been fighting for 12 years. It turns out the secret messages from the Paradan planet to Sisko were coming from the rebels. Miles jumps up. He's like, that's a breach of the treaty we signed and we have to cancel the peace talks. But Odo says that's premature. And then Miles says, they got to you too. And Sisko and Kira come in with phasers drawn saying they need to talk. Julian is there too, and he tries to give Miles some kind of a drug, But Miles pulls the thing out of his pocket that he built earlier and he throws it to the ground, causing a bright flash, which somehow shocks everyone but Miles. That was very strange.
He had a high-tech flashbang, basically.
Yes, and he runs out of the security office and he shoots a couple of security guys and he runs away down some dark hallways. And we go into the ad break.
I noticed that the Bajorans were once again terrible shots.
That's true, the Bajoran missed him.
I think we saw that in episode 3 as well, where the Bajoran elite troops didn't seem to be able to hit anything they were shooting at.
Yeah, but they were not elite. That was the B squad, remember?
We kept on calling them that, but...
Now, was that to Curtis that he shot? I mean, did we just introduce that guy and then just shoot him?
Oh, I don't know. I did not check.
I couldn't tell because they shot him so fast. Well, he's a goner. Actually, I don't know if he killed those guys or stunned them. We don't see them again. Miles tries to initiate an emergency transport to the Rio Grande, but the computer doesn't allow it. So he pulls off his badge and throws it aside, and he runs into a force field. He opens a panel and starts mucking with the force fields, forcing them to drop all of them, and he takes off, running down the hallway. And then he runs into Jake, and when he tries to tell Jake that they're the only two normal ones, Jake calls security on him. Miles is very disappointed. He pulls off a panel and climbs inside. It's been a while since we were hiding in the conduits, but here we are again.
Yeah, once again, shouldn't the conduits be the first place to start checking?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because Odo and the security guards arrive and they don't even think to look in there. It was so silly.
Yeah. I mean, we've had enough conduit episodes now to know, first thing you do...
check the conduits. While Miles is climbing, he drops his phaser, but he lets it go and keeps climbing. He manages to crawl his way to maybe a cargo hold, I think it is.
Looks like it, yeah.
And then from there, he beams himself onto the Rio Grande.
They really need a better lockdown protocol.
Yeah, it's not good. Sisko calls and tells him to shut down his engines, but Miles is like, nope, your tractor beam is also offline and I'm out of here. And he raises shields and takes off. They fire a couple of shots at him, but he gets away.
That surprised me, that they were actually prepared to shoot at the shuttle.
Well, Sisko loses the shuttle every couple episodes.
Well, they don't usually lose it from them blowing it up.
Miles opens a channel to Starbase 401, Admiral Rollman. Admiral Rollman comes on the comm. She says she knows who he is, and she tells him to get back to the station. But he is not listening, and he hangs up on her. He can't believe that someone or something has infiltrated all of Starfleet.
Yeah.
Now he kind of catches up to his log from the beginning as he heads into the wormhole, and we go to an ad break. I couldn't figure out what the point of that dropped phaser was. Why did they show that? Because once he beamed onto the Rio Grande, I guess there were phasers there, because he has a phaser later. I don't know. That seemed like a funny cut.
I think it might have just been to show that he couldn't shoot his way out to get to the shuttle, and he'd have to think his way around it, like getting to the cargo bay where he could use the transporter.
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
Why they didn't shut down all the transporters.
Yeah. So now he's 1 minute and 20 seconds from the Parada planet, and he orders more coffee. He's obsessed with this Jamaican coffee.
Drinking a lot of coffee. Maybe that's causing the paranoia. Everything's normal, and he's just drunk so much coffee.
Maybe. I know I get pretty jittery.
Yeah.
He adjusts his course to Parada 4, dropping to Impulse. The other runabout is 2 minutes behind him. He adjusts his speed to let them catch up as he switches to manual navigation in the polar magnetic field of the planet or the moons. I don't know. I was confused by that.
Yep.
And then he shuts down his engines and disappears into the magnetic field. I don't know. It was a little hand-wavy.
Yeah, that was a little hand-wavy, but I think it goes to show that Miles knows a trick or two.
Definitely. Then he asks the computer if the people on the other shuttle are still there or if they'd beamed down, and he learns that all 3 people had beamed to the surface of Parada 2. So Miles beams down to the same location and starts sneaking around. At this point, if he had walked into a surprise party for himself, I would have laughed myself sick.
That would have probably made it the best episode ever of all time.
The greatest Star Trek episode in history, if that's what had happened.
People would be talking about that in the 23rd century.
Oh, that would be great. But that's not what happens. He walks into a room with Kira and Sisko talking to some Paradans. And O'Brien, with a phaser drawn, says, having a little secret negotiation with the rebels, are we? Sisko says, you don't understand. He tells Miles to put down his weapon, but Miles says, no, you put down yours first. And I thought here too, where's the third person? Because we only see Kira and Sisko, and the computer told him there were 3 of them.
I thought it was interesting that they did actually put their weapons down.
Yeah, everybody else drops their weapons. One of the aliens says, everything you need to understand is behind this door. But Miles is like, no thanks, don't want to see it. But then one of the Paradins, I don't know if he had a weapon in his back pocket or something, but he shoots Miles and he goes down.
Well, he's the smart one. He's learned that you keep more than one gun on you.
Right. He's done the Fox Mulder phaser in the boot.
Yeah, exactly.
Then they open that door, and Bashir is behind it, and they tell him to come quickly, and Bashir runs out toward Miles. But in the room that Bashir runs out of, we see another Miles. This one has a wound to the side of his head.
Looks like he has a bruised eye.
Yes. He stands up, and the two Miles look at each other.
Boom, a second Miles O'Brien.
Yeah. The new Miles says, he looks just like me, and Kira says, he also thought he was you. One of the Paradins says, they thought that would make him more convincing. We believe there was a triggering device programmed into him that would take over during the peace talks. The Paradin government, apparently, had kidnapped Miles, replaced him with a replicant, potentially to wipe out the entire delegation of Paradin rebels. Julian says there's no way to prove it wasn't Miles. He passed the physical exam of flying colors, and he knew his way around the station. Then they wonder why he was trying to come back here, and Miles says, well, if it was me, I'd be trying to warn someone. Sisko says, in a strange sort of way, he was trying to be a hero. The fake Miles then grabs Miles' shoulder and says, tell Keiko, I love, and then he dies. That was very weird. And also, the end.
Yeah, that was a very abrupt ending.
Yeah, he didn't even get to say, I love her. He just went, I love, Anyway, the end.
Yes.
Well, how will we overanalyze this episode?
Well, first thing is, I think Colm Meaney managed to have just the most amazing, disapproving, something's wrong face the entire time of this episode. Nobody can do that face like Colm Meaney.
He did have that face on for almost the whole time. The only time he was happy was when Jake was talking to him about his science project.
Yeah.
The worst was when Jake turned on him.
Oh,
and
yeah.
He was just like, oh no, they got Jake.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Right.
Now, the second thing, Sisko was contacted by the rebels. We know that because they talked about it in the logs.
Right.
And obviously they told them that there was a duplicate Miles. How do we know they were telling the truth?
Well, they didn't, I guess. And that is why they were so cautious with Miles, right? They didn't do anything with him. They didn't hold him prisoner. They didn't alert him because they were afraid if it was true, he might be triggered, right?
Yeah.
They weren't sure until they actually got there and saw the real Miles.
But Julian said the replicant was perfect.
Yeah.
So how do we know this wasn't the real Miles and they just rescued the replicant?
Oh, 100%. That's my note.
That one, they never really covered.
Yeah.
They didn't say, what happened, how the Paradin government, maybe they're super duplicitous and this was typical of them. I thought it was almost too hand-wavy for the episode to make sense. It was great up until that point.
Well, they needed some kind of a glitch or something he was missing or something that wasn't quite right. It needed to have something to explain it so that they could identify in the end which one was really Miles.
Right.
Because ultimately, how did they know when they got there?
Yeah.
The rebels easily could have, made up this whole thing. And that guy that they picked up at the end was the actual replicant.
Yep, and they killed the real Miles.
Yeah.
It was so easy to fix as well. Julian could have said, I found one DNA sample that was incorrect. And showed the signs of cloning. And plus, you could also do a joke with Julian saying, most doctors probably aren't as skilled at this as I am.
Okay. Yeah, they certainly had set up the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and that would fit with Julian perfectly.
Yeah.
Plus, Julian has had a lot of experience of cloning Miles, because that's what he did last episode.
I mean, they had a number of opportunities, too, when Miles was doing all those things to sneak away.
Yeah.
He could have, he was a better version of Miles. He managed to do everything that Miles would have done.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. And the next thing is, I think they failed to appreciate just how technically competent Miles was. So he did all these things, the replicant, allegedly replicant, did all these things, and they should have been, if you like, prepared for them, because Miles is a very good engineer.
Right.
I guess you could argue that they didn't know how good a clone he was, or replicant he was.
Wait, I thought of something.
Yes.
They did have one way of detecting that it wasn't Miles.
What was that?
Molly.
Really?
I don't think they would have told her, that's not really your daddy.
Oh.
And she did not like him.
Oh, that's a really good point. Maybe that should have been the clue.
Maybe that was when Keiko went to talk to Sisko right after that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what she told him.
Oh.
Like, Molly sussed out that wasn't him. And so then they quick did a thing where Molly wasn't there anymore, right? She went to stay at the Fredricksons.
Yeah.
I think she stayed at the Fredricksons in that Rumpelstiltskin episode or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, there was their replicant detector.
Okay. I think that's a pretty effective one.
Although, I don't know why, but it worked.
And slightly leading on from that, so they were waiting for the Paradan rebels to find Miles.
Yeah.
And then they were able to move on him and tried to take him into custody. Why didn't they have a transporter set up on Miles' comm badge? So when they got the word from the Paradan rebels, they'd found him. They'd just say, okay, transport the replicant, the clone.
Right.
It wouldn't have been great for the story, but it would have made more sense.
Yeah. That would have been a better plan. Or there were a lot of things they could have done to kind of lock Miles out, but I don't know. They didn't do any of them.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was based on they just wanted to do this kind of...
They wanted to do that kind of story.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess you're right.
And all the peripheral bits, all the ancillary parts were just hand-wavy. Oh, yeah.
Well...
I feel like this is your comments on the Storm episode where they missed some of the big parts.
Invasive procedures.
That would help make it a more cohesive story. And I feel they did that with this episode as well.
Yeah. Yeah. They could have, I think what I complained about there was they should have made the Storm part of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, they missed some opportunities just to have this Miles is uncomfortable storyline.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Really, that wraps it up. I mean, not a huge amount of analysis.
I wondered a couple things. One, what was with the coffee, the Jamaican blend double sweet? Was that supposed to be telling me something? Because he said that line maybe 5 or 6 times. I mean, was that a clue of something?
This episode was sponsored by Jamaican Coffee Incorporated.
Jamaican coffee blend double sweet.
And the American Sugar Corporation.
And also, if they are this good at building replicants, I mean, they could be replacing anybody. We need to get our hands on that technology.
Right. I mean, especially if Julian couldn't even tell the difference.
Yeah, totally.
Which just defeats the whole thing of how do you know that isn't the replicant with, just a busted eye? You just killed Miles. I do have one final thing.
Oh, sure.
As is the case.
Yeah.
It's really good to see that The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is part of the Star Trek universe.
Along with Star Wars.
Yes. I mean, we're seeing Vogons on the promenade talking to Jake. It's good to see.
Sure.
One giant shared universe.
Well, should we go to women in the future?
Absolutely.
I don't have much for women in the future because there weren't a lot of women in the future story here. Obviously, we had Keiko, and she wasn't the best version of Keiko. She certainly had no poker face, although in that situation, I don't know that I would have behaved any differently. I think, they've taken the opportunity before to just send Keiko to Bajor on some kind of a field trip. They could have done that again. But like I said, they needed Molly to be the replicant detector. So I guess that's the women in the future. Plus there's that the little girl was the one who figured out the replicant.
And you did get to see Kira being annoyed Kira at the ministers again.
Kind of. You just hear a little snippet of her voice
I did like that.
into the log, yeah. Well, okay, that's kind of it. There wasn't really anything else for women in the future, so I'm just going to go right to rating, and thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. What is your rating?
Okay, this is kind of a complex rating.
Yeah.
I give it a thumbs up because I remember when I watched this episode initially, how much I really enjoyed it. It's an episode, however, that I do not think repeat viewing works on because you know what the hook is. And when the first time I watched it, I remembered it was like, what is going on?
Yeah.
I can't remember the point where I went, is this really Miles? Is this like a hologram? Is this something that's happening on the holodeck? And the reveal at the end I thought worked well. Repeat viewing, not so good. But I still give it a thumbs up because I remember how much I enjoyed the episode when I originally watched it.
Well, anytime you know a twist ending, the second time through something can be a real bust.
Yeah.
You start to see the holes. Those are the things that you end up focusing on.
Oh, yeah. And I think that you're right. That's the problem.
So you remembered in this rewatch what was coming?
This is funny because I started watching it and I'm like, oh, I don't remember this episode. Oh, this is really interesting. It was maybe, like 5 minutes in. I suddenly went, oh, I remember this episode. Yep.
Oh, okay.
I've got it.
Well, I had never seen it before. And like I said at the beginning, I was excited because I like these sorts of episodes where you're not sure, is Miles the one who's out of place or is it everybody else who's out to get him? I always like those stories. So I enjoyed it. I'll definitely give it a thumbs up.
Yep.
But yeah, there were some things they could have done better, no doubt. And there were some few holes in the story, as we talked about, but I liked it. It was very Star Trek-y, regardless of those holes.
I felt bad for the replicant.
Yeah.
They clearly had done a great job at copying Miles, and he seemed to have Miles's sensibilities as well.
He had all the emotions, and he kept having conversations with himself, right? Like he would say, yes, Miles, no, Miles, to himself. But he was very real. He was very Miles. And so, yeah, they sort of created a life form and then just shot him.
Yeah, it was sentient as well. So in the same way as in Man Alone, where they were annoyed at the guy killing the clone of himself.
Yeah.
I mean, surely this is a similar kind of thing if you've killed a sentient life form.
Well, I do wish they had gone out of their way a little bit more to explain that, like, the replicant only had, you know, a 4-day lifespan, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a power source that would end after a week or something. I really wish they had done that.
Oh, he carries out his programming and he just shuts down.
Exactly. This made it look like it was so easy. All they had to do is hook some wires up to somebody's brain and they can create an exact copy of them. So then, you know, people could live forever. We'd be right back into this whole debate about the Fountain of Youth.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I thought that was a little careless and they should have cleaned that up. That was a string they left untied.
I wonder if it was a timing constraint. They had to edit it down.
Maybe, but you could have cut out a couple of other things. You could have cut out one of his 27 orders of Jamaican coffee just to give a 20-second explanation that these things only had a 7-day lifespan.
Oh, you know, going back to what I said earlier, they run on sweetened Jamaican coffee.
As long as he could get access to the coffee, he would continue to run.
Yeah. That's exactly it.
That's pretty funny, actually. Anything else to say about this episode?
No, just another 2 thumbs up.
Yeah. Okay, well, then that is it for Season 2, Episode 14. Kind of a short recording for us. I guess we didn't have a ton of analysis about this one.
This wasn't a very deep episode.
It really wasn't. There wasn't a lot of development. Come back next week for Episode 15. In the meantime, if you'd like to tell us your own overanalysis of this or any episode, or if you just want to say something nice, please email us at rebingeit@gmail.com or tweet us at rebingeit. Also, check us out on talkthroughmedia.com. You can leave feedback for us there, and you can also listen to all of our other awesome podcasts.
Thanks for joining us on the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.